Buenas tardes. Como presidenta de la Asociación Universitaria Ciencia, Feminismo y Masculinidades, voy a dar paso a la inauguración de nuestro cuarto congreso. Presentamos en primer lugar a la doctora Dominique Roe-Sepowitz en representación del Instituto de Gestión de la Innovación y del Conocimiento, Ingenio, CSIC, de la Universidad Politécnica de Valencia.
Buenos días, buenas tardes, desde el sur al norte global. Bienvenidas todas, todos y todes a este cuarto congreso de CICFEM. En primer lugar, me gustaría empezar la apertura de este congreso recordando los primeros contactos que dieron lugar al primer CICFEM, que se realizó en 2019, antes de la pandemia, de forma presencial en la Universidad Politécnica de Valencia. Ese primer contacto empezó desde el activismo académico y feminista, pero sobre todo desde la sororidad entre mujeres docentes universitarias que comparten la esperanza y el deseo de transformar la universidad y transitar hacia una educación superior diversa y justa, una universidad inclusiva y comprometida con la justicia social, cognitiva y medioambiental, una universidad que rechaza cualquier tipo y forma de violencia hacia todas aquellas personas que por su género, orientación sexual, identidad, cultura, condición económica, raza, todavía sufren discriminación, prejuicios identitarios y opresiones hacia sus libertades de ser, hacer, aprender y transformar. Una universidad que sea capaz de potenciar la liberación epistémica de todas aquellas personas históricamente excluidas, marginadas y silenciadas en los procesos de producción de conocimiento. Una universidad comprometida con los retos sociales y medioambientales a los que nos enfrentamos y con el alcance de los objetivos del desarrollo sostenible. Una universidad centrada en las personas y orientada al bien común. Una universidad abierta y libre, capaz de generar espacios de diálogo y coproducción de conocimiento entre diferentes actores. Una universidad comprometida en generar evidencias científicas sobre las principales problemáticas a las que nos enfrentamos en este siglo XXI, así como proponer soluciones individuales y colectivas para superarlas. Hoy, en la apertura del cuarto congreso de CICFEM, estoy convencida que en esta comunidad científica compuesta por mujeres y hombres comprometidas con la transformación de nuestras sociedades, estamos avanzando hacia una universidad y sociedades más diversas, justas y libres de violencias. Por último, agradecer a todas las personas que organizaron este cuarto congreso y están haciendo posible su realización de forma virtual. También agradecer a todas las personas que están conectadas a nivel local y global y quieran participar en este congreso, aportando esperanza y acción transformadora a pesar de la situación de violencia que estamos vivenciando. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Monique, por estas palabras. Siempre es un placer colaborar con Ingenio, que desde el primer año nos está apoyando en la organización. Ahora voy a dar paso a la doctora Marta Talevera, que es vicedecana de Prácticas y Participación de la Facultad de Magisterio de la Universidad de Valencia.
Hola, buenas tardes a todas y a todos. También dar las gracias por invitarnos a la Facultad de Magisterio y a la Universidad de Valencia a participar en este cuarto congreso ya de feminidades y masculinidades, creando este espacio para poder discutir, conversar, intercambiar experiencias, posibilidades y recursos para todos y para todas. En nuestro caso, para la formación de profesorado, que es una parte importante de la formación futura, no la única. Sabemos todos que aquí estamos de muchas disciplinas y es lo más enriquecedor de este congreso probablemente, el intercambio entre sanidad, enfermerías, educación, educación social y todas las participantes que me consta que vienen de diferentes ramas. También quería ofrecer en un futuro, pues también si la situación sanitaria nos lo permite, poder realizar una virtualidad mixta o una presencialidad incluso, ya podemos soñar un poquito, y las instalaciones de la Facultad de Magisterio serían también una posibilidad también de participar desde, ya os digo, desde un contexto un poquito más cercano. De momento estamos aquí, es una posibilidad y nos permite intercambiar, como digo, gratas experiencias. Mi enhorabuena a la organización y mi deseo que sea un éxito, como lo ha sido otros años, me consta. Y adelante, muchas gracias y aquí nos encontramos todas, que es un placer. Muchas gracias por vuestra invitación y ánimo.
Muchas gracias, Marta, por tus palabras y el ofrecimiento. También es un placer siempre colaborar con la Universidad de Valencia y te tomamos la propuesta, tomamos nota de la propuesta. Por cuarto año consecutivo, por estas fechas, es una satisfacción dar la bienvenida al CICFEM a más de 360 congresistas procedentes de más de 11 países, representando más de 64 universidades y más de 50 instituciones de diferentes partes del mundo. El CICFEM es un espacio de debate en torno a evidencias científicas, no cabe ocultarlas ni sustituirlas por ideologías. Un congreso feminista, es decir, no solo hablamos de feminismo, sino que lo practicamos en el mismo congreso y, por lo tanto, es libre de violencia y de cualquier tipo de discriminación o acoso. Sabemos que hay congresos que se denominan feministas, pero donde hay incluso insultos. Este es un congreso feminista de verdad, donde no caban estas cosas y se respetan todas las opciones. Un espacio de reflexión y diálogo que hace avanzar el conocimiento científico sobre feminismo y masculinidades en las diferentes áreas, como ya se ha mencionado, de conocimiento y entre todas las personas implicadas. Es nuestra satisfacción reconocer los pasos históricos que se han realizado en nuestro país y a nivel mundial en las últimas semanas con la irrupción del Me Too universitario, conllevando que el reconocimiento y la inclusión de medidas para la prevención y el abordaje de la violencia de género y aisladora en las universidades ha llegado a un punto de no retorno. Siendo estos pasos de gigante noticias excelentes para nuestras estudiantes, hijas, nietas y bisnietas, todavía desde la ciencia nos queda camino por recorrer. Estos días de congreso nos ofrecerán espacios privilegiados para debatir y reflexionar en torno a evidencias científicas en cómo una vez más desde el CICFEM contribuimos a hacer historia. No podemos inaugurar este congreso sin ofrecer unas palabras para la paz. La Asociación Universitaria de Ciencia, Feminismo y Masculinidades, organizadora del CICFEM, expresamos nuestra solidaridad con las mujeres, niñas y con todas las personas que en Ucrania están sufriendo la invasión militar. Llamamos a unirnos a todas las personas del mundo que se oponen a esta guerra y expresamos nuestra solidaridad con las científicas, científicos y la población que se atreve a hacerlo también desde Rusia. Las mujeres siempre hemos destacado en nuestra oposición a toda guerra, como ya hicieron las troyanas. Ahora también nos estamos movilizando por la paz y llamamos a todas las personas de ciencia y feminismo a hacerlo intensamente, porque si no, lo peor estará todavía por llegar. Con estas palabras, damos por inaugurado el cuarto Congreso Internacional de Ciencia, Feminismo y Masculinidades. Y para ello os voy a presentar a la persona que nos conducirá por las diferentes sesiones. La doctora Elizabeth Torres, que es investigadora Margarita Salas, postdoctoral en el Departamento de Sociología de la Universidad Autónoma de Barcelona y es miembro del proyecto Horizonte 20 All Interact. La palabra es tuya, Elizabeth.
Muchas gracias, Teresa, y quería agradecerte tanto a ti como al resto de las personas participantes de la mesa inaugural las palabras que habéis compartido y que no han podido ser una mejor entrada para este congreso tan esperado. La verdad es que para mí es todo un placer poder compartir este CICFEM 2022 con todas y todas vosotros, volver a encontrarnos aquí, ¿no? Y este año que hemos empezado acompañados con la suite sinfónica Sheresat de Rimsky-Korsakov, que fue estrenada en San Petersburgo el 3 de noviembre de 1888 y que está basada en Las Mil y una noches. Y desde las notas tan evocadoras desde esta suite, queríamos daros la bienvenida a este congreso donde desde las evidencias científicas dialogamos para acercarnos a la libertad y a la igualdad que desde el feminismo y las nuevas masculinidades defendemos y deseamos, ¿no? Animamos en este sentido, desde estas ideas, a seguir y a compartir también todos los debates que se den estos días también en las redes a través del hashtag CICFEM22. Y antes de empezar, destacar unos detallitos técnicos. Como verán, la conferencia inaugural tiene formato de webinar, por lo que solo los ponentes tienen acceso tanto a micrófono como cámara. Pero esto no va a ser un problema porque el chat está activado y así podremos compartir y comentar también lo que queramos a través del chat y así sentirnos un poco más cerca. También recordarles que la conferencia inaugural será en inglés, pero que aquellos que deseen seguirla en castellano pueden pinchar encima del globo de interpretación y escoger el canal correspondiente. Y como que supongo que todas y todos tenemos muchísimas ganas de empezar con esta conferencia inaugural, le doy paso a la doctora Guiomar Merodio, que es profesora en la Universidad Nacional de Educación a Distancia, la UNED, y también es coeditora de Géneros, Multidisciplinary Journal of Gender Studies. Cuando quieras, Guiomar.
Muchas gracias, Elizabeth. Muy buenas tardes a todas y todos. Es para mí un honor presentar a la profesora y amiga Dominique Roe-Sepowitz, una científica social centrada en el desarrollo de investigaciones innovadoras para abordar problemas sociales emergentes, especialmente aquellos que afectan a las niñas y a las mujeres. Sus estudios se basan en teorías y métodos que exploran la dinámica de las relaciones, el impacto de las experiencias traumáticas y el desarrollo de intervenciones sociales que contribuyen a la mejora de la vida de quienes han sufrido violencia, abusos o explotación. Es una experta reconocida en Estados Unidos sobre trata de seres humanos, profesora de la Facultad de Trabajo Social en la Universidad Estatal de Arizona, donde es fundadora y directora de la Oficina de Investigación e Intervención sobre Trata con fines de explotación sexual. La profesora Dominique Roe-Sepowitz dirige numerosas iniciativas en las que trabaja conjuntamente con personas aliadas de la comunidad, como la policía, servicios sociales y organizaciones de apoyo a supervivientes de explotación sexual. Es también la directora clínica de Phoenix Starfield Place, un programa pionero en Estados Unidos de vivienda permanente y apoyo para mujeres víctimas de trata y sus hijos e hijas. Coordinadora de numerosos proyectos estatales y federales y coinvestigadora principal de una subvención de 5 años otorgada por la Fundación Nacional de la Ciencia de Estados Unidos para investigar sobre las redes ilícitas que facilitan la trata de seres humanos en el país. Forma parte del consejo editorial Journal of Human Trafficking y ha participado en más de 40 publicaciones científicas. Ha colaborado con numerosos medios de comunicación y en 2019 fue entrevistada para el documental de la televisión pública de Estados Unidos sobre trata con fines de explotación sexual en América. En relación al impacto político de sus investigaciones, ha sido invitada en 2 ocasiones a la Casa Blanca, bajo la administración del presidente Barack Obama, para participar en reuniones nacionales de responsables políticos, grupos de defensa e investigadoras sobre la lucha contra la trata de personas. Es un placer tener a la profesora Dominique Roe-Sepowitz en CICFEM por su posicionamiento activo y solidario con las víctimas, con los derechos de la infancia y de las mujeres. Thank you so much, Dominique, for making the time to join us this afternoon. Early morning for you in Arizona, so double thanks. We are looking forward to listening to you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. I would like to thank you, Guiomar, and all of the people with the Conference of Science, Feminism, and Masculinities for having me. I do want to take just a quick moment to talk. I know you've just spoken a little bit about Ukraine, but to acknowledge that so many of the people leaving the Ukraine, over 1 million, are women and children, and those are the most vulnerable for exploitation. And certainly that's what we're here to talk about, and that's what we worry about. So each of us has a role of making sure that as they migrate, that they do not have exploitation experiences. So we must work together for that. So let me share with you my presentation. Today, I'd like to talk to you about how prostitution is violence against women and the work that we do here in the United States. I was really lucky to have Dr. Merodio come with me and be part of our research office. And we're a new type of scientific pursuit. We are academics, but we don't just work to learn. We we learn to do. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about that model and how that approach works with prostitution, and how that action against women and girls is something that we need to learn about, but we also need to do about. Prostitution is violence against women and girls. It is an action that includes sexual violence and domestic violence, and all the different types of abuse, including economic abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, financial abuse, and spiritual abuse. So the way that I work, the way that our community works together, is that we partner, that not one of us thinks that we have the solution to how to help people leave the situation of prostitution, that we are really careful that we work in partnership with other communities and other agencies. So my partners include social service agencies, refugee agencies, community partners that do legal assistance, as well as law enforcement. We use community engagement. We do things. We show people in our community that prostitution and sex trafficking coexist, that without prostitution, sex trafficking doesn't happen. And we talk about it in our community and work to deal with some of the stigma. We focus on this topic exclusively, both sex and labor trafficking. We are unmitigated in our work on this area. We don't dispute whether or not prostitution is violence against women. We don't dispute whether people who are in trafficking deserve to be there. We know that women and girls, men, boys, and transgender persons deserve the opportunity to have a life that's worth living. And how we do that is by absolute laser focus on making sure that there are opportunities to get out of that situation. We are endlessly full of goodwill and enthusiasm. We'll work with anyone, any church, any program, any law enforcement that has the right idea and is working towards the freedom of girls and women. We focus, and Dr. Merodio talks extensively about impact. We make sure that every decision that we make has impact, that does something for someone. So every paper that I write, everything that I do focuses on that impact, making sure that the people who need to be benefiting are actually benefiting, and that we constantly reevaluate our activities. So at the end of any event or any activity that we do, we stop, we thank each other, and we say, what could we do better? How could we reach people better? How could we be more empathetic? How could we be more survivor driven? What could we do to be better? So the goal of my research office and the work that I do in my community is to create a world without violence for girls and women, to create situations where that doesn't happen, that girls and women have different choices when they're at the bottom of their choice list. And how are we going to do that is we listen and we learn. We learn about how to do things better. So we know that our research can contribute to that goal of ending violence against women and girls by creating programs that are preventative. The best thing that we can do for any victim of violence is prevent it from ever happening. If we can work with children to never have them go down the pathway of meeting a trafficker and falling in love and getting into the situation, all of us will be better off, especially that person, and of course their children. We know that we can create better interventions, that we can do better treatments, that we can provide better opportunities for victims. We know that we can help people get out of the situations. And this is a global need, that if we tell people that prostitution is a problem, but we don't give them exit ramps, we don't give them ways to get out, we're just telling them, like law enforcement has for so long, you can do better than this. You don't need to be out here. All of those things are messages for girls and women that don't make any sense. They're not out there because they have choices. Can everyone, Guiomar, is their translation working? Is it okay?
Yeah, sorry, Dominique, I think we can see the presentation, so maybe you want to try to say it again.
You bet. There we go. How's that?
Yeah, I think that's perfect now. Thank you.
Technology is really so complicated, isn't it? So we also want to build better criminal cases. We want to make sure that if there are people who and cartels and groups and gangs that are focusing on our girls and women, that we dismantle them and make sure that they don't victimize another person. One of my jokes is that traffickers don't go to prison and become plumbers, right? They don't come out and become a contributing member of society unless we do something about that, unless we insist on that, unless we provide them with those supports when they're in prison. So we can't expect people to transform and to change their behavior unless we are part of that. So what do we know? What have we done? So we've looked at sex buyers and sex traffickers. In my work, in my research work, I'm a clinician, I'm a trauma-focused therapist, and I work with victims of sex trafficking in lots of different settings, including the housing program that I support. I'm the clinical director. We have 15 apartments, and we have, right now we have 12 adult women living there and their 28 children, and we provide therapeutic support. I've also been running a therapeutic group since 2006, every week, learning about trafficking, learning about the victim's experience. But what we realized in the around 2010, 2011, was that providing services for victims was simply not enough, that we had to understand the market, we had to understand what was happening and provide other ways of preventing this from ever happening. So we did take some looks, right? We looked at who the sex buyers were, we placed sex ads and had those sex buyers call us, and we analyzed their behavior, we analyzed what they said, we tried to figure out who they were and what they were doing. We looked at different consequences for buyers. If you send them texts, if you send them letters, if you arrest them on scene, are those things ways that we can intervene with the buyer's market? We've also spent a lot of energy, particularly with our police departments in Las Vegas and the Phoenix Police Department partnerships, is learning about what traffickers do. Why do they behave the way they do? How do they find victims? What has their life been like before they became a trafficker? How can we intervene? And so what we've tried to do for using this information is to create those better cases in trafficking to get people to stop their behavior. And so what we did was we took that knowledge and applied it to the victims that we were already serving. And so in our research, in our practice, we are always trying to be innovative. We're always trying to think and learn about ways that people can apply information. And so here's a little bit of information from you that we have really started to pay attention to prevention, and that we know that if we prevent, if we use survivors, for example, as partners and we engage with them, that they're likely to prevent it from happening to their children or their friends' children, and that we can prevent things by providing education. We know that we have to talk about prostitution. We have to talk about it in a community, just like we do domestic violence and sexual violence and second order violence. We must talk about it. It has to be something that isn't under the covers, that isn't behind closed doors, because if we do not, we are adding the stigma. I've worked with survivors of trafficking who were at domestic violence programs for over a year and never once mentioned that their batterer, their abuser, was also selling them for sex. It was very shameful. It was a stigma that they couldn't face. But what we're telling victims is if they don't talk about it, or we don't talk about it, it's so bad that they have to continue to hide it. So it's very important that we get those tools for people to get out, that there are ways and means that they can get out the door. There's a place for them to go, people to talk to, people to report to, and that it's very important that we be victim-centered and trauma-informed. Life experiences lead people down terrible roads. Trauma makes decisions for our clients to maybe not be very friendly or aggressive or unkind or manipulative. And recognizing that from a trauma lens is incredibly important in our compassionate, positive sense of regard for our clients. We have to acknowledge that substance abuse is very complicated. It's not a simple problem. A woman in an interview recently told me that her trafficker made her meet a quota every day. She had to have a certain amount of sex and sell a certain amount of sex every day she had to make. But he also would spit on the floor. And before he gave her her heroin, she had to lick that spit up off the ground. So the power of substance abuse, the power of the relationship with the trafficker are all things that we must learn and really understand if we're going to be helpful. know that we have to continue to build tools for our victims, the victims that we serve, to end those relationships with their traffickers. In some cases, that trafficker is the first person who has shown that victim love in her whole lifetime. In a refugee setting, it's the first opportunity that person would have to be good at something or to feel strong at something. And so finding ways to understand that relationship, but also ways to help it break it. And for us, the most important part of the work that I've done in the last 16 years is to be open to new ideas, to never be afraid to try something new or to be innovative, because we've tried for hundreds of years to help people who are in these situations very unsuccessfully. And so we must try something new. We must go down a different road, and we must be open to it. So what does our, I don't know what's happening to my, can you see that page, Gilmar?
Yes.
Okay, so what does our research show? So what have we done? We've spent thousands of hours looking at, oh, I'm so sorry. I know something just happened. My PowerPoint decided to stop working. Give me 1 second.
No worries, we have time.
So typical.
Yeah.
Just 1 second. May this be the worst thing that happens today. Okay.
Sure.
Share screen. There we go. Okay. So what has our research taught us? So it has taught us how to be laser focused on who needs our support. So 22% of the many thousand survivors that we have interviewed and surveyed identified that they were in special education or extra cognitive learning environments while they were in school. So what that teaches us is we don't have to focus on the whole school, because that's almost impossible, especially in countries like the United States or big countries where there are many millions of children in schools. But if we focus on one area, like special education teachers and bus drivers and communities that serve those exceptional children, that we can do a good job. We also know now that 1 out of every 7 victims of trafficking spontaneously told law enforcement that their traffickers strangled them or used choking as a discipline. So what we know about choking and strangulation from our work in domestic violence is that a person can die quite quickly. There's damage that can happen to the throat. And soon after the strangulation experience, that victim should go to the hospital and have an examination to prevent any further injury or death. And so we now know, instead of just talking to a victim and helping them find a place to live, if they do have a strangulation history, they should be sent to the hospital. We know that victims of sex trafficking and prostitution are oftentimes induced by their traffickers to do other crimes, that they sell drugs, they steal things from stores, that they rob their customers, they steal from other people under the direction of their traffickers. And what that helps us do is really have a compassionate understanding of the criminal histories of the victims that we serve. It's called forced criminality. And we must address that, because if we're asking victims to participate in exiting, to move forward in their life, but they have a very heavy criminal history, they cannot move forward and be independent. We know that younger traffickers target younger victims. So that's an interesting and important lesson for us. We know that sex traffickers are specialists. They either work with child victims of trafficking or adult victims. There's very little overlap in our research, particularly in Las Vegas. We know that traffickers are first arrested the first time in their life before they turn 18, which means that we could intervene with them, that we have an opportunity to stop traffickers from being traffickers if we could intervene in that juvenile system of corrections. We know that gangs are involved in 16% of the sex trafficking in Las Vegas. That means that gang violence and trafficking and domestic violence, all those groups of law enforcement need to partner, that there are aspects of all of those things that need to collaborate together. So our research is about developing policing knowledge and information. We also know that sex buyers are everybody. They're our brothers and our fathers and our uncles, and that if they are not afraid of their behavior. They feel very much like it is an entitlement. But we did learn in our research of robberies of sex buyers that if something is stolen from them, they feel like that it is their right to report it and get it back, including if maybe their bride, their wife gave it to them a week before. They will call the police and report it because they are not ashamed of their behavior, which is a very interesting thought process. We also have found that how traffickers find victims, and this again goes back to prevention. If 20%, which is what we found in Las Vegas, 20% of traffickers found their victims on social media, particularly Facebook and Instagram, we can do work with Facebook and Instagram to talk about that, to look for some signs, look for messages that they see. We also know that traffickers use incarceration of victims as a place to find them, that they write them letters to lure them into the life. They communicate with them by putting money on their prison accounts so they can buy a toothbrush. But know that a person who is given $100 while they're incarcerated, when they come out, they owe that person $100 and they have to earn it. And oftentimes that leads into an exploitation and prostitution situation. So we're working really closely with our sheriff and our police departments, our prisons and our jails to show them how to see this from happening. We also know that traffickers go to places where people are vulnerable. They go to 12-step meetings, right? Recovery programs, group homes for children, coffee shops and schools, wherever vulnerable people will be. And we of course recognize that children are not the only vulnerable population. Anyone with a substance abuse disorder or a mental health challenge that is complicated in a way that they struggle with, that traffickers will take that opportunity and exploit it. So what do we do at ASU STIR, and what can I engage you with and encourage you to do in your community? So engage with survivors, talk to people who this has happened to, sit with them, be part of it. In my work, very, very rarely do I speak to people in an event. I'm almost always behind the scenes, running around, getting things, and the survivor community is out front. They're working with new victims. They're communicating and saying, I've been where you are. What we do with survivors is we pay them and give them resources themselves to honor their contribution and to recognize the importance of their involvement. So to highlight this research and engagement is to really benefit the survivor community and make sure that everything is survivor informed and survivor led. Make sure that you have good partnerships, that you talk to people, that you talk to doctors and psychologists and school social workers, and that you have a rounded understanding of what the problem is in your community, that you don't read the newspaper and that's the only view, or you don't hear a speaker at church maybe and that's your only view. You must get a wide view of what is needed and really understand what other people are doing, and then find your place in that community. Ask our survivors what they want and what they need. So we, during COVID, decided that all of our street outreach had stopped working. There was no one doing street outreach, and we were going to do something. And so we got a couple of people who had recently been arrested for prostitution in our community and asked them if they would come to a virtual focus group, and said, if we were coming out on the street to help to contribute to your well-being, to tell you that we care about you and that we want to provide services, if today is your opportunity, if today is the day, right? No force, no manipulation, no coercion, what should that look like? And they said, well, could you put on your handout, which I have right here, someone who looks like me, right? So we took a picture of someone who looked like them, a model, and put it on our handouts. They said, on your handouts, could you have information specific to HIV testing and Hep C testing? So listen to your community, be very direct about your work. Other tools that I have in my work is to share credit with everybody. Anyone who donates anything, anyone who helps, anyone who cares, anyone who lends a hand, share credit with them. It makes them want to work with you again. And spread knowledge and encourage engagement. When someone says, how can I help in your community? I'll do everything I can to help them find a place to engage in our work. that addressing violence against women and girls, is particularly in prostitution, takes a community. So what type of activities do? We have a website in Arizona called sextraffickinghelp.com that lists all of the different agencies that we've trained and kind of developed to serve victims of trafficking. Most of them would not have been serving trafficking victims maybe 10 years ago, but now we're interested and have certain places they can. We created a safe, supportive housing program, Phoenix Starfish Place, the first like it in the country. We do street outreach because it's needed, right? We learn about it and then we do it, and we do it as best we can. Every time we do it, we get better. We do a drop-in center every 6 months that says, in the streets where prostitution happens the most, we won't judge you, come on in, we'll help you. We've got doctors, lawyers, we've got drug counseling, 18 different agencies that will come and be helpful with you. Come and see us if today is the day for you to get out. And then we work with law enforcement in crisis support situations, like when they do hotel stings, we support the victims if they choose they want to get resources on those times. So this is a picture of Phoenix Starfish Place. This we opened in November of 2017, specifically for women who are leaving situations of prostitution and trafficking. It's really beautiful. I would live there. This is the amount of people that it takes to run a drop-in center. So all of these people work with me, they're partners with me, they're survivors, they're our community who cares about trafficking. And imagine being a survivor of trafficking, having a really tough time walking into this beautiful building and seeing all of these beautiful faces saying to you, I see you, I know what's happening in your life, and I'm here because I care about you and I want something better if today's the day for you. So nothing religious, nothing forced, no coercion, allowing people to change when they're ready. So what is the impact of prostitution on a person? Why do we care so much about this? Is it because, is it because we think it's some, terrible thing that we want to stop in this sort of ethereal, theoretical way? It is not. When you meet a person who's been prostituted or trafficked, the things that they present are heartbreaking, are so incredibly complicated. We want to prevent it, right? Every time I tell a story about a trafficking survivor, I work with a trafficking survivor, all I can think of is we must stop another person from this happening too. No one deserves to have these things happen in their life. So we know that there's complex post-traumatic stress disorder, that they have anxiety, depression, dissociation. It's hard to connect to other people. They have something called a trauma mindset. Many of our clients, not all of them, but it makes it difficult to trust and build relationships and move forward in a way that life feels happy and positive and is full of opportunities. That our clients talk extensively about not feeling worth anything. They've had a price on them. They've been told they were worthless. They've been treated terribly. And many people saw them when they were in that prostitution or sex trafficking situation and did not help them. All of those buyers, all of the people working at hotels, all of the people who are Uber and Lyft drivers, transporting them, taxi drivers, they know what's happening and they don't intervene. Why would they trust us? Why would they reach out to us? And what we know, most importantly, is that trauma is passed on to the next generation and we must stop it. So what can we do? We've got to talk about it. We've got to do everything we can to prevent it. We've got to create responses and opportunity for services. If we want prostitution to end, we have to create a place for people to come and be safe and to heal. We want to build an anti-sex trafficking army, right? That's my mentality. We're building a community that cares about this, and we're going to work together in a survivor-driven way, and we can work together for change. And here is my information. This is my website for my university at Arizona State University and our sextraffickinghelp.com. And then projectstarfish.education is our website for schools that has prevention on it. So that was my presentation. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Dominique. Muchas gracias por compartir tu excelente trabajo en CICFEM. Creo que después de escucharte estamos todas muy emocionadas. Gracias sobre todo por la pasión con la que transmites tu trabajo y el compromiso con el que investigas para mejorar esta grave problemática que afecta a la vida de miles de mujeres y niños y niñas en el mundo. Gracias.